Welcome to the Space Marketing Podcast, where we look at marketing principles, strategies, and tactics through the lens of space. Hi, I am your host, Izzy, and this year we will meet the space industry professionals that focus on promoting their company and space. On this episode, we continue to meet with space marketing professionals on the agency side. On this episode, we will meet Ed Fyfe, Senior Brand Designer with Ed Fyfe Design. So lift off in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Space Marketing Podcast. Information relating to our discussion today and links to the video version can be found in the episode show notes on spacemarketingpodcast.com. Please like and subscribe to the podcast. It will help more people reach beyond the atmosphere. Information in this episode is for entertainment and information only. Please consult a professional for your specific situation. In today's fast-paced world, the partnership between storytelling and graphic design has become a crucial factor for brand success. It is more than just creating a visually appealing image. It's about weaving a narrative that connects with people on a personal level. Storytelling gives a brand its unique voice and personality, making it more than just a product or service. Graphics and images continue the brand's story on a visual level, transforming the narrative into a visual language that can resonate and connect with audience if it is done well. Together, they work harmoniously to capture attention, create a connection, build brand recognition, and leave a lasting impression. In an era where consumer engagement is vital, understanding the importance of storytelling and graphic design is essential for brands looking to stand out in the ever-changing market. On this episode, we will journey to the graphic design side of marketing, one of my favorite parts, and chat with senior brand designer and storyteller Ed Fyfe from across the pond. Ed, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Izzy. It's great to be here. Cheers for having me on.
Oh, thank you for coming. And it was a little bit of a challenge to get it going. So I believe this is the first time I've ever had a graphics professional on the podcast, which is kind of interesting because that's one of my favorite things. And I recently learned the term a marketeer, which I really do like. And so we are marketeers that are visual translators. Please tell the audience, what is it that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So you know how lots of different space industry companies at a glance kind of look like the same brand. So if you go on your phone and you just look at lots of different space industry companies' websites, for example, you'll notice enormous pictures of planet Earth at the top. Maybe there's an animation, maybe there's a little bit of hardware stuck over it, whether that's a launcher or a satellite. The issue is once you put them all side by side at a glance, they all look kind of identical. And the same thing kind of goes for space logos as well. So if you're a space company and you put out your logo, often it looks as though you dropped it into AI and asked it to spit out a long list of logos. And lots of those logos in the list may look identical or very close to your competitors. And so my task is to solve that and help space companies with a little bit of research, long-term planning, and graphic design, like you mentioned, Izzy, and blend those three components together to create a brand that's got a story, that's got a bit of a long-term vision and what some people like to call strategy, and also has a visual identity which differentiates it from other space brands, makes it memorable for people that matter.
And it looks on purpose. Excuse me.
Ideally.
And it looks on purpose, yeah. Yeah, because a lot of companies, they'll just, grab some clip art and say, okay, that's the logo. But, with real graphic design, it's more than that. So let's first tell everybody kind of how you got involved in space. visually it's eye candy, the whole part of space. But how did you personally get interested in space?
Yeah, so I got into space through a film actually when I was a little kid. I was probably 7 years old. I watched Apollo 13 for the first time. Absolutely loved the visuals, the sound, just the way the aesthetics worked of space travel in the interior of, the command module of the Apollo program, and just all the visuals, all that 1960s stuff just looked absolutely gorgeous and really, really got into my head. Fast forward to now. Well, I used to work in consumer facing branding. So that's stuff that you find in the supermarket, things like Nescafe, things like, I don't know, biscuits, milk powder, Coca-Cola, this sort of stuff. So my job used to be to take those brands, and when a new product came out, design the packaging for it, design a little bit of the campaign around it, and some of the customer and consumer facing comms. And that took me to different places around the world, which is wonderful, obviously. But I always felt that there was something, some of the meaning, some of the purpose was kind of missing. I love doing the work. I love the people that I work with. Learned a great deal. But for me, space was always the thing, and it was always sort of niggling at the back of my mind since I was a kid. And so eventually I did find a job where they did a little bit of space stuff on the side. And that's kind of my gateway. That's how I got in. Did a tiny space project in the whole year. I mostly did pet food, dogs and cats and, the packaging for pet food. But there was one tiny slither of that time where I got to work on a bit of identity stuff for a space brand. And that was just it for me. And as soon as that project was over, I just realized I need to get on this, and this is where I need to spend my time and energy, really. It's mostly about time. I don't want to spend time doing something that I'm not 100% into, and space is something I am.
Right. It's something that we can just pour ourselves into, because that is extremely important as a creative person, is that you have to believe in what you're doing. And I know cat and dog food, in products, that is important. I mean, if you have an animal, you love your animal. And it really gave you I'm sure, a very good foundation on what makes people tick, why people gravitate towards different brands. So that was huge, I think, in learning. It was helpful for me. I did brand as well. So can you tell us how Ed Fyfe Design actually was born?
Yeah, so kind of as an extension of the story I just mentioned, Ed Fyfe Design is just me. It's a one-man show. I connect customers, employees, investors, and fans with the space brands that need them. And ideally, my focus is on not kind of building brands. I don't think designers or marketers do that, even in-house ones. I think what I try and do is just give companies the infrastructure, the branding infrastructure, to grow their brand awareness. So to grow the brand rather than build it. Um, a brand takes a long, long time. And if you have the infrastructure at the start, it just saves you lots of effort long term. You don't have to do rebrands and stuff like that. You never have to ask, why am I doing this? Where's this campaign coming from?
I always had a line that I always taught when I was working with businesses, that you only change a logo when it needs to be changed. And some of the most prominent logos in the world have been around for decades. Like Coca-Cola is an example. That brand logo has barely changed at all, and that's the difference between a good brand. And
Yep. And you watch what's
so
happening with Pepsi, and it's this roller coaster. You see
yeah.
that logo change every cycle, and you just wonder, okay, so Pepsi is reliant on a yin and yang symbol essentially that's turned sideways and color. And I don't know, that's fine. It's actually cool because it offers an alternative to Coca-Cola. But at the same time, for a you know incubated space brand that's just starting out, if you've got all of that in place at the beginning, it just saves you so much hassle down the line, time and money as well.
And it's not just about what you create. It is about it's what they do behind it. It's like everybody talks about the Nike swoosh. They paid $35 for it, and it was some college student out of a garage. But it has, the logo is important, but it's also the support of the logo and the reinforcement of the logo and it becoming an identity piece. So, do you want to talk a little bit about how imagery develops a brand?
Yeah, so storytelling and imagery are these emotional triggers. So your brand has a function. So if you're a space company, say that you build, I don't know, like antennas, for example, and you have this functional, benefit. Like the antennas allow you to pick up certain signals, communicate certain signals, um, to connect with audiences beyond just your team and your kind of segment. It's important to bring in other elements which trigger a little bit of emotion. So, what's the emotional benefit that these antennas bring? So, things like storytelling and imagery are these triggers. They allow you to um, put your product in front of other people and get them on board and get them excited about it in a way that just telling them I make antennas doesn't. Um, there's a really good quote that I often use, which says like a product is only as good as what happens in somebody's head. And I think it was Rich Silverstein from GS and P that said that, and that kind of encapsulates brands. Like what we do, our products is making visual identities and stuff like that for a designer like me. But that's not actually what I'm making. What I'm trying to make is what happens inside a person's head when they see those things and connect them with the brand and hopefully get motivated to act in a direction that the brand wants them to.
And tell the story. You look at like the Starbucks logo. If you really look at it, it's a mermaid and it has a story that's behind it that is more than just coffee. It's the whole history of the brand. So, you know,
That's a really good point. Like the thing about that as well, Starbucks if Starbucks is in the space industry, this is just my jaded self coming up. If Starbucks is in the space industry, that logo would just be a big star, or it would be a planet or a swoosh or a little arrow moving around that planet. It would not be anything out of category, so to speak. So, if Starbucks in the coffee industry, it would probably just be a coffee bean if it was at the stage where the space industry is today. And that's not a bad thing. That just shows where we are and where we have opportunities. If everybody else looks one way, you always have that chance to differentiate. And Starbucks not choosing to make their logo a coffee bean, like, say, I think Costa do, yeah, let's say Costa, it just makes it so much more memorable, doesn't it? You don't want to be the third brand that has a coffee bean as your logo, ideally, if you can help it.
or the 100th. I mean, when I see a coffee bean,
Mm.
it reminds me of the community coffee shop that grabbed the clip art and created a coffee bean logo. So that is looks like everybody else. As we're talking about space, one of the things that logos are integral part of is product. The NASA T-shirt is seen around the world, and with all the different either the ball or the meatball is what they call it, or the worm. And when we take that logo and we make it into a tangible item, please talk about how a product can actually play into a storyline.
Yeah, so a logo is the sort of a component of your visual identity. There are many others. And where that visual identity plays out, where it can actually come alive and start interacting with people, are touch points. And touch points, simply put, are just stuff that you've got, stuff that people might see. So that could be anything from a business card to the satellites that you launch, to cargo containers that you ship them in, to the hairnets that you wear in clean rooms. Like touch points are everywhere for brands, and especially so in the space industry, which has this like overwhelming amount of different options available. um, and when you say products, like merchandise, for example, that is just one of the many touch point avenues that you can explore as a space brand in today's world. For something like merchandise, though, you really got to be willing to invest some energy. You see a lot of brands try it, and you can see that they're spread too thin because a lot of products in their merchandise shop are essentially the same products as the next merchandise shop, but with their logo on it. So with Shopify and these sort of online platforms, they're wonderful platforms. They're incredibly easy to navigate and easy to build a shop. But the downside is that a lot of the products in those shops are kind of just copy paste items that anybody can access, whether you are a coffee brand like Costa or Starbucks, or whether you are a space company. At the end of the day, it will be the same bottle with a different logo on, unless you go a little bit further. And going further should be an adventure, really. It shouldn't be something that's a chore. And if it feels like a chore, maybe merchandise isn't the touch point that you should, divest that much energy into. Perhaps you can invest it into a different aspect of your business instead. So what I'm trying to say is, yeah.
When you look at it as actually an extension of your brand, that you can create a touch point that builds identity with your audience. People that wear NASA t-shirts are marketing NASA, but they're also telling the world, I'm a space nerd. So, it can really build into that storyline as far as, product development. And if you do it well, and if you do it with art and you do it on purpose. So again, if you just slap something on a product, it's like grabbing clip art for your logo. There's no meaning there.
Exactly. And that's the thing with these items as well. Like, NASA's an interesting example because with NASA, the merch came later. Like the merch really exploded in the last decade, I'd say globally anyway. Maybe in the US it was kind of circulating before, but globally, like H&M picking it up and these big like high street shopping chains just buying the logo and applying it, buying the rights to it. All of that came because of NASA's achievements, because of what NASA's already achieved. But if you're like an embryonic space brand and you just started out 2 years ago, you're using NASA as a benchmark probably isn't the way to go. It's probably gonna I don't know, it will consume some energy to make a shop with a load of products which have your logo on them, instead
Yes.
of designing merchandise items which have that story and that meaning as well. And so what I'd recommend is anybody can do this, is you just sit down and you look at your brand and you look at your products and what you offer, before you think about merchandise, and you start to think, where are the crossovers between what we build and what we make and what we could give to a consumer? What could I give my nephew for Christmas if our company started making merchandise, and not a hat or a polo shirt, but something that's actually connected to what we're doing? So I'll give you an example. There's this company, which is pretty well established. It's been going for a good 50 odd years, I think, called MDA Space, Canadian, and they've manufactured this satellite called RadarSat-2. RadarSat-2 does Earth imaging, and it takes incredibly high resolution pictures of the Earth. Like, there's a billion other companies out there that are doing that right now. But when it comes to merchandise, what MDA do is really interesting. So instead of just saying we're MDA and we'll put our logo on a hat, they've said, we take these incredible pictures of the Earth's surface. What would happen if we turned one of those into a beautifully designed, very minimal poster that follows the MDA brand guidelines? And we take photographs using our satellite, RadarSat-2, of all of our locations around the world. So immediately you start getting these layers happening of story. First, you've got the satellite. Then you've got all these wonderful, locations globally showing that MDA Space is this global company. And then finally, you've got this item which encapsulates the two and is a merchandise item which you can purchase. And I just think when you see examples like that happening in the space industry, it really cheers me up, because it shows that somebody's sitting down and really thinking about what value can we give to customers and consumers outside the space industry, inside the space industry, whether that post is a gift for somebody at a conference or whether it's something that I could buy for my niece or something like that. It doesn't matter. It's something that really enhances that brand awareness, and it does it through.
Hold on to your boosters. We will be right back with Ed Fyfe, Senior Brand Designer with Ed Fyfe Design, after a brief message from our sponsors. Please like and subscribe to the Space Marketing Podcast so you don't miss a thing.
when you look at merchandise as well, there's just so much happening in the industry that is positive, and MDA is just one example. I mean, say that you're Starship, for example, your SpaceX, you've got Starship. SpaceX merchandise is pretty good actually. But there are companies that are so inspired by what SpaceX is doing that they've started to go off on a tangent and create their own stuff. So Starship's heat tiles are these big hexagonal ceramic tiles. What some companies done is they've made those tiles into coasters. So immediately it communicates the heat component of what those tiles do. It has the shape, which is this iconic hexagonal shape, which is all over SpaceX's branding for Starship. And finally, it has this use. It actually has like a function. It's not just something that you stick on your desk or hang on a wall. It actually has value as a coaster. And they've done space shuttle ones and all sorts as well, which is kind of interesting. With repurposing, it gets way more exciting. So it goes up another level. So there's a company called Yin, and they're a jewelry company, quite a sort of mid-range jewelry company. They're not like super fancy, they're not Tiffany's, but they've got a young following, and they sell a few SKUs and collections, which is nice. And they've done a collaboration with a launch company called Galactic Energy, where they actually have their logo, the Yin logo, the jewelry company logo, on the livery of Galactic Energy's series launch vehicle. And when those launch vehicles dump their stages, Yin teams drive out to the fields where they've fallen and start getting to work. They start harvesting the metal. And what they do with that metal is they then build that into jewelry, which is then sold to consumers. But it's done as this collaboration. It's an out of sector brand, jewelry, and it's a very much in sector brand, which is Galactic Energy. And they have this partnership to make these merchandise items out of repurposed material. And it's just wonderful to see thinking like that happening in the space sector. There's another brand called Werenbach, which make Swiss watches, like luxury Swiss watches out of flown Soyuz boosters. But I think now with the geopolitical climate, it'll be harder and harder to reclaim those. So yeah, going closer to home is probably the way to go. So if you're a launch brand, obviously it's an option. You've got this hardware. Unless it's reusable, which is highly unlikely at this point in time, maybe in a decade, you're going to have a lot of leftover hardware to use, and why not put it to use as merch? Lego is another good one. Loads of companies exploring Lego. The list goes on.
Well, and I love the story that, I mean, you could be a jewelry company and say, how can I be a part of space? How can I be a part of that space story? And that is genius. That is absolute genius to actually go and recycle that, because that's also a story and a whole identity with a whole generation. We're not about throwing things away. Let's reuse it, repurpose it. And I love that
100%.
story.
Yeah.
So,
And you've got brands like, I'll grab one now actually. So you've got this brand here. This is my bag. It's Freitag bags. And yeah, like what they do is they make these bags out of old tarpaulins from lorries and trucks, and the straps made out of the seatbelt. And essentially, because those materials are so durable, like space materials have, functional benefits as well. How can you leverage some of those functional benefits to have a sort of repurposed end of life scenario where you have, okay, a load of spent boosters, a load of rocket engines that will never fly again? How can you engineer a new life into those components? And yeah, it's wonderful to see brands exploring that so early, because Freitag's been around forever. They're like a Swiss brand, very popular. But when it comes to the space sector, it's just wonderful to see so early in the development of the industry, brands like Yin and Werenbach like getting on this idea. Wonderful.
and another thing I love about it is, one of the things I love being scrappy and, use what you have. And if you're a space company, a lot of them are having a little bit more of a challenging time, because the grant model is not necessarily the surviving model that you need to have for a business plan. So having a consumer market is kind of important. So look at what you have and how can you repurpose it? How can you make the coasters of, things that you're already building? So I
Mhm.
love that different direction, and being scrappy with that, as well as injecting a story with it.
Yeah, I mean,
So
by their very nature, these items have story baked into them. So way more than just
yes,
buying an off-the-shelf cap and stitching a logo onto it. These items have come from the work that you're doing. They've come from the lab, like where you cook up rockets or you build satellites. So why not imbibe some of that story into these products? And I think something like that is going to inspire somebody way more than a water bottle with a slap-on logo.
right. And always be thoughtful with your design, because we were talking before we started recording about AI and how you can see the AI images from a mile away, and they are attractive, they are done well, but there's something plastic about them that it doesn't connect like something that's very thoughtful. And did you want to talk a little bit about how the AI trend is affecting graphics in a way?
Yeah, just to segue it from the merch as well. Like the nice thing about merch is that you can generally hold it in your hands. It's something tangible. So there's a lot of AI that will focus on, making products look gorgeous and they look great in the shop. But actually having one in your hand is a completely different experience. And I think that's something that we're starting to lose as time moves on. So, something I always do every year is I make like a physical envelope mailer, which I send out to clients and friends in the industry. And I actually post it. I physically go to the post office, I print these things, I design them myself, and I post them out. And they're not about me, they're about what's happening in the industry. So each one of these mailers has like a massive list of the most exciting sort of breakthroughs or trends that happen in the industry. The theme sort of changes a little bit each year, but I make sure that people have something in their hands that actually reflects what's going on. Because often, yeah, with AI, it's easy to get stuck in the scroll. You see scroll after scroll of the same sort of plasticky looking visuals, and that'll change in the next 5 years. They'll get a lot more diverse, and there'll be a lot more kind of visual differentiation when it comes to the direction you can take AI. But for now, anyway, it all does look kind of samey, and you can sort of, I think, not just people like me and you in the industry, but I think customers, people on the street can see the difference sort of a mile off. And yeah, it's an interesting time to be around because I think if everybody's using AI, it's a great opportunity to make something tangible, and merchandise is definitely a way to do that.
And I think it brings everything back around to the in person and dealing with the real thing, like you said, the tangible. So, for example, conferences. We had online conferences for a long time, but now that
Mhm.
AI is kind of, it can duplicate what people sound like and what people look like. Then meeting somebody for real is going to have a lot more weight, I think, in the future. And one of the
Yeah.
things that I love is that, as a graphic designer, we tend to see words as shapes, and sometimes we don't see them as words. And sometimes something can be pretty glaring and it not be correct. And I for a long time that was something that kind of every time I saw I had a boo boo, it would just kill me. But now it shows that I'm human. That AI didn't write it.
Oh yeah,
So there's
absolutely.
some, yeah.
Yeah, although I think AI, you could probably easily tailor it to make a mistake, every thousandth word or something. But that said, yeah,
Maybe.
it's those imperfections that make it human, and it's those imperfections that people resonate with. It's vulnerability at the end of the day, and I think vulnerability is one of these things that if you see that in a brand, if you see that in a person, it immediately creates a bit of affinity and alignment. Having this perfection and this sort of mechanical, sort of android driven, sort of robotic aesthetic is one thing. But I don't know how long it will last. And I don't think, again, it comes back to long term thinking, like what's underneath it? Why are you making it look like that? Why does it have that look and feel? What's it communicating? What's the long term kind of reasoning for having that in place?
What's the identity? Who's the real brand underneath the image?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's it. Exactly like you say. It's So yeah, like marketing campaigns and sort of quick fixes and quick wins, they're very tactical and they're very sort of in the moment. But underneath that, you've got brand, and brand doesn't change. Coca-Cola doesn't change
Right.
over years and years. Like SpaceX's essence hasn't changed in all the time that it's existed. Same goes for NASA. You know, you could take any of these brands and put them in front of somebody and get them to scribble on a napkin like, oh, here are three words that I'd associate with them, and you'd find general congruity between them. And yeah, again, it comes back to why you shouldn't change your brand halfway through your life cycle.
Oh gosh, yeah, no. You only change it when it ceases to be effective. Only
Mm,
when it ceases to be effective. You know, if it's still working, I don't know. I'm sure you've experienced this too, where you have a client and you have a good brand mark and you have a good image developed and everything, and then they get bored of it. And then they want to change it because they're bored of it, not because the brand has it needs it. So and then they change it, and it really does a lot of damage if you change it too much too quickly.
mm. Yeah, I think if a client has, or a founder or a marketer, like an in-house marketer, feels like they're bored of the brand, it's on us really as designers to dig a little deeper and find out, okay, why? Like, what's boring you about it? And you might find that it's actually not the brand that they're bored with; they're bored with something else. And it's about asking the right questions. Like, if you don't ask the right questions, you'll never get to the right answer. And so that one's kind of on us. Like if a client comes forward and says, I'm bored of it all, I want to rip it all up, it's on us to figure out the why behind that and how we can help and what impact that will have on consumers. There's definitely a wonderful opportunity in it. It's just about unlocking that opportunity.
And on the flip side, you also have those clients that want to keep something because their cousin made it and it needed to
Oh yeah.
never see the light of day, and but they're emotionally attached to it. So you have both ends of the spectrum for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And very little in between, I find. It's very much
Yes.
polarized. Uh, the in between is like the fantasy for people like us, but it doesn't exist. We've been in this game for a while, and it's hard to get that perfect kind of sweet spot. It's on us to really dig into why they want to do these things and unpack how we can help them with it.
And those are the fun ones when you do find that sweet spot. You know,
Mm.
there's nothing more fun to do than to create a brand. It isn't.
Yeah, it's
So
wonderful. It's just the best work, and yeah, it's an absolute privilege to do it. I think yeah, designers and marketers are very lucky people.
so let's switch a little bit on how we met. We met because we have a similar person that we are both connected to in SaxaVord Spaceport. So let's talk a little bit about that's in your backyard, and I'm a spaceport fan, and SaxaVord is one of the 7 that are being built in Scotland. And do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got connected with SaxaVord Spaceport and the story that they're digging up, literally?
So as you're listening to this podcast, this is exactly how I found out about SaxaVord Spaceport, not through this podcast, but through their own. So SaxaVord have operated a really good podcast show. Highly recommend checking it out for the best part of the last, I don't know, it might be 3 years or something. And it's very informal, it's very relaxed, and they get guests on from the local area who work locally on Shetland. They get people in who are working on the spaceport, and they have a sort of smattering of other guests as well, which is sort of space adjacent or involved with space. And so listening to that, it was absolutely fascinating. Each episode, you go on this little journey through what's going on there, and it really, for me, the branding worked. It reinforced this idea, like SaxaVord sounds really interesting. It's on this very remote part of the UK. It's so far from anywhere. It's actually easier to get to. I calculate it's easier to get to Pakistan from London than it is to get to SaxaVord on certain days, depending on weather. So, it's when you say backyard, it's quite funny. Like something in my mind was like, oh God, I wish. But it's actually quite an adventure to get to. And I think that's something when it comes to spaceports and when it comes to location in the space industry. it really differentiates them because you have to really want to experience it to go there. So back to the story of how I got there, I did realize at some point that they were doing this small space conference up at Shetland, and I had a window, bit of free time, and jumped on it and just said, okay, I've listened to this podcast long enough. I have to get up there and see what it's all about. And so, yeah, I attended the conference. Wonderful. It was an extension of the brand in the sense that, just like the podcast, very relaxed, very intimate, and very kind of, yeah, kind of cozy. And it just sort of gives you this different sense of what a space conference could be like. Obviously, there are these giant ones where it's very intense and very high energy, which are wonderful. But the SaxaVord run conference, which is done in partnership with a local uni, UHI, University of the Highlands and Islands, offers something else. So it's a completely different sense of what a conference can be like. Small group of speakers, some of them online, some of them in person. You get to chat to everybody, and it's just this really nice mix in the audience as well. You have people just who live on Shetland there. You have visitors. It's not just space people. So you get different viewpoints and different lines of questioning there as well, which is wonderful. So yeah, that's kind of how I ended up there, and spent a few days. Debbie and the SaxaVord team were kind enough to invite me up for a little bit to see just a little bit of the spaceport itself, which is an absolutely wonderful experience. And I'm very grateful to their kindness and hospitality during the trip. It kind of made my year last year, and it's just incredible to see the layers of brand storytelling that they've got going for them. So one area that's particularly exciting is just historical heritage. You know, Unst, the island, most northern island habited in the UK, at least to my knowledge. SaxaVord's right at the top of that, so it's almost as far north as you can go. And even on site, like within the boundary of the spaceport, they uncovered a Bronze Age stone circle from 4,000 years ago. And just to know that you're sort of building something brand new and innovative on something that has so much heritage is absolutely fascinating. And between that and today, you've got the biggest concentration of Viking longhouses on the island, more so even than Scandinavia, because Unst was almost like and Shetland in general was a sort of stop-off point for Vikings on their sort of trade routes. So you've got Viking heritage as well. Fast forward even further, you've got Cold War and World War II architecture and bunkers and that heritage on top of that. And then finally, you get to the spaceport itself, which is something completely new and very innovative. And so, yeah, there's different layers there, which are absolutely fascinating.
And when you say innovative, you're talking about, they're wanting to go green rockets and green launches. All of the spaceports seem to have that type of theme in the UK, and they're wanting to take space travel in a different direction than what it has been. And so I'm a fan of what the spaceports are doing in the UK and how they're reimagining what space can be. So speaking of which, as in a graphic form, where do you see the space industry going in the next 10 to 20 years? And what's exciting you about the future that's on the horizon?
Yeah, so 10 to 20 years is kind of an interesting, it's a really interesting band of time because we're gonna in the very near future see a post Starship space industry essentially, where we have enormous capacity to move stuff, goods around, whether that's to Earth orbit, cislunar, whether it's lunar surface, and finally to Mars and deep space. And I think even now we're still grappling with what that will mean for the future of the industry. At this point in time, we have some awareness and some planning. Space station brand recently signed up with SpaceX to put their space station inside the fairing on Starship. And so there are people looking ahead. But I think even within SpaceX, it's hard to predict just exactly what change this will bring to the industry as a whole. I think nobody on Earth knows that and could, because the implications are just so big. So that's one massive change post Starship world. Another one is that, well, orbital shells that we've got around the Earth at present are obviously congested. It's the big buzzword at the moment, space sustainability and congestion, but also this issue of deorbiting by, essentially getting objects and satellites to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. From LEO, you get lower and lower and lower, and finally you reach this crunch point where you enter the atmosphere, and yeah, you burn up. But I think that's going to create a bit of a choke point, because if you've got global constellations and they have to get closer to the Earth to deorbit, it just creates even more congestion at this thinner layer, this more narrow layer, where suddenly you've got multiple constellations plus other operators. And so I think there'll have to be big steps on how to solve this issue. And what my pet hope is that people will start harvesting satellites in orbit. It costs so much to get the stuff up there. Why not just keep it
Right.
there and have repositories and build, your asteroid mining capability or your off-world manufacturing capability out of what you can reclaim from these vehicles. The metals up there, the components are up there. How can we harvest them and start, building infrastructure with what we have, and essentially living off the land, but off the land that we've created. That's my hope anyway. That being said, we're sort of not that far ahead with that on Earth either, so it'll be interesting to see how we tackle it in space. But it's a hope, at least. Let's put it that way.
It's a hope here down on Earth too, that we can start
Mm.
to reuse what we have. And when I also do a Space for Kentucky, and my next roundtable is alternative fuels, and one of them is a rocket that takes water bottles and makes it into fuel.
Mm.
And it's
Have you heard
actually
of
more of a stable
Skyrora's
fuel.
concept? Yeah.
Yes, they're going to be on there too. They're going to be on
Mm.
the Space for Kentucky. And I know Kentucky is not necessarily what you would think of as rockets or anything like that, but it's something that it's a narrative that needs to be told. That there is other alternatives that are coming on board in our reach for space. That hopefully that technology will impact how we use fuel down here on Earth, and that is my hope.
Yeah, I think these new and exotic fuels for spacecraft, just getting, whether it's point to point, whether it's Earth to orbit, cislunar orbital transport vehicle refueling and stuff like that. I think it's going to be fascinating seeing how fuels evolve over the next few years to make sure that we get obviously the right amount of delta V out of them, but also have a sort of sustainable footprint, and hopefully they don't cost so much in energy to manufacture those fuels when compared with others. There's some really interesting innovations happening, and yeah, like what Skyrora have explored with Ecoscene is cool, and I'm hoping to see a bit more of that. So yeah, I'll be tuning into space for Kentucky if there's a live link.
Yes, and that's on the 29th of February, so please do.
Ah,
And
okay, that's very soon.
our
Great.
very soon. Yes, I no molds growing on my toes. So all right.
Well, another
So
thing is,
yes.
oh, sorry, just one last thing to say about like the next 10, 20 years. So like you were saying about Space for Kentucky and sort of communicating the value of space, I think this is something where space companies in general need to get a little bit better at communicating what their value is to,
Yes.
people on the ground, people out of sector. And so I think what we'll see, like me and you and other marketers and brand people in the industry, we'll start to see this shift towards communicating not just space, which is what most companies are doing now. So your average person, if you see a space company, um, see their comms materials, their campaigns, what their brand looks like, feels like, they'll just derive from that. Okay, this is a space company, they're doing space. But I think what needs to happen next is for companies to say space and what value, like what are we actually bringing to you as a customer, as a consumer, as somebody down on the ground. Um, and I think as
Yes.
a side effect of that, we'll start to see a lot more out of sector brands coming into the space sector as well. So companies that are traditionally out of sector brands, so whether that's heavy industry, whether that's even clothing. I mean, it's amazing. They're going to launch the Intuitive Machines Columbia uh, it's like a sort of jacket brand that they've teamed up for the Intuitive Machines mission, which is going to launch very soon. I think this week, next week, soon anyway. And they've leveraged some of Columbia's heat technology, like thermal protection, for the spacecraft itself. And I think things like this is a dabble. This is Columbia dabbling in the space sector. But long term, I think there'll be opportunities for outer sector companies to really immerse themselves in space and create a division specifically for space. And it'll be in areas that are kind of unexpected, like, winter jackets. How can we leverage those technologies? We've been doing it for years. How can we just apply that to space? Why spend the R&D on developing something that's space specific from scratch with a startup when you already have years of heritage in industry that's existent today? And I think that'll create this wonderful halo effect around these different brands as well, because space does that.
Well, and the technology changes how we live. Like, for example, one of the companies that you wouldn't think of for space is Tide, detergent. And they're looking
Yep.
at how to do laundry up in space because you don't have as much water. And
Yep. It's great.
once they can figure out how to get your clothes clean with less water, well, what's that going to do down here? It's going to make it to where we can clean our clothes down here with less water, impacting, in only making things better. So, yeah, it's funny how the space comes back. It just comes back, and that message needs to be heard, because a lot of people have a disconnect, with space. They don't realize that they're carrying space in their pocket when they're cell phones, and yet they just don't think about it in their daily lives. So
Yeah,
that's one
you're
of the
right.
messages I like to get out.
I think as well, a lot of these space companies, their messaging, slogans, the way that they write copy is very much about
Yeah.
our benefit for humanity, and it's for the good of Earth. But it's very hard for somebody walking about out there to really know that and to understand it. Like, I'm always having conversations with people that just can't believe that there are other space companies other than NASA and SpaceX in the world, and that's a massive problem. Like, people need to be
Yes.
aware of this. Number one, because it benefits them, but also because it just opens their mind to what else is out there, and the potential. And so it's on the space companies, but it's also on out of sector companies, like Tide, to really step up and say, okay, we're going to take a chunk of this market and claim it and start doing work there, because it is going to evolve and it is going to expand, and somebody's going to do it if Tide don't. And the somebody might just be some startup that started in a garage, which is great as well, by the way. I'm not favoring either side. I just think it's an enormous opportunity for expansion, and
Yes.
brands like Tide have enormous R&D budgets, and so why not? I'm pretty sure people at Tide really enjoy working on a project like that as well.
And it all goes back to, we're going to tie it all back to graphics and how it's all a part of how we're inspiring our world. And graphics inspire as well. So, yeah, let's finish up with one last question: is what thought do you want to leave our audience with today? What do you want them to take away with them as they're mulling about their day?
Yeah, so if you're doing space, if you're in the space industry already, like we were saying with AI and everything, there's a lot of buzz, there's a lot of chatter. It's quite a noisy environment to operate in because there's so much acceleration and so many new developments coming out all the time. But I think the key thing is to remember uh, to cut through it and not drift too far from your original reason why you're doing this. To always remind yourself, okay, this is why I'm doing space, and to just focus in and actually have fun with that as well. I think you've got to have fun with what you're doing, and it's easy to drift, like in any industry, but especially in this one because stuff's so fast moving and so new, that there aren't many handholds to hang on to. So having that focus and that sort of concept of why I came to this in the first place is key. For designers, marketers, strategists as well, I think we all have this innate responsibility. As I mentioned before, it's a privilege to work in this industry, but we have to live up to that. And so if a client, like we were saying before, just wants to use their nephew's logo, but you can help them understand how that's not going to be a good long-term solution for their brand, then it's kind of on us to step up. It's very tempting to take cash and just go and, change the color of the nephew's logo or whatever the client wants, but it's really on us to deliver a bit more value there and to help the space industry to be as diverse as it actually is. The functions are so diverse, and yet the visual side is borderline identical. The next time you look at a space brand's website, that should be obvious. And the same when you go to a conference and see the booth. But yeah, I think overall it's positive. I think for an industry that's, always maligned and sort of stigmatized for having a branding problem, there is change in the air. There are wonderful examples of great branding breakthroughs out there, and that's something that we can look forward to.
Absolutely. And inspire with graphics, inspire with your message, inspire with your heart. So a special thanks to Ed Fyfe, Senior Brand Designer with Ed Fyfe Design, for sharing his journey to space. Be sure to check out his links listed in today's show notes. Please like and subscribe to the Space Marketing Podcast so you can get the word out about this incredible industry of space. I hope that you have found this podcast useful for your journey as you reach for the stars.